When you think about money, your financial situation, how does it make you feel? Do you feel confident or anxious and overwhelmed? What if your issues with money aren't about your budget, your spending habits, or even your income, but rather the way you think about money in the first place? Welcome to Change Made Easy. Changing your habits, routines, and behaviors is hard. We make it easy. I'm Paul Leviton, and I help high achievers like you who feel stuck bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be. Traditional self-help doesn't work. It's either too rigid, too generic, or too overwhelming. My approach is different. I simplify change by making it so easy it can't not happen. Using my easier framework, I'll help you create habits, routines, and behaviors that stick so you can stop struggling and start thriving. It's that easy. Today, we're talking about money and asking the question, how do you build real financial well-being? Not just wealth on paper. That's great and important. But we're talking about the peace of mind and clarity that you get from true holistic wealth. If you've ever felt stuck financially or like you should be further along by now, this conversation is going to show you why it's not just about spreadsheets and stock tips. It's about getting clear on what you truly value and aligning your actions with your values around money and what you want for your future. And to talk about that, we have today's guest, Cody Garrett. Cody is a certified financial planner and the founder of Measure Twice Money. Cody has built a following of loyal fans, of which I consider myself to be one of, by doing what most people in his industry will not: teaching people how to understand and manage their money without selling them a thing or asking them for anything in return. He shares his entire planning process online for free, which is all a part of his mission to change the public's perception of what financial planning really is. And I'll have links to all of his tools in the show notes. In this episode, Cody will walk you through why your bank account might reflect your values more than you realize, and what you can do to start to shift one or both. He breaks down the money scripts that often run in the background of your mind, including one that almost everyone has but doesn't even realize. And make sure to listen in for Cody's explanation of why when he starts with a new client, numbers are the last things he talks about. Instead, he starts with purpose, values, and the big question that he thinks every person needs to answer before they can build true wealth. So if you've ever wanted to feel less stressed and more clarity with money, this is the episode for you. Let's dig in. How do you define financial well-being?
That's a great question. So I think about finances as one piece of a pie. And I think about wellness ultimately as your physical, mental, spiritual, relational, and financial wellness. And what I find is that if we were to put those out as a pie and say, how big are those slices in terms of how much time, energy, and financial resources I invest in that area, we'd probably come up with very different things. I can immediately think that in terms of physical wellness, I would love to invest more in that area: time, energy, and financial resources. So ultimately, yeah, I think about wellness is comprehensive, comprehensive yet not overwhelming. I think sometimes we think that comprehensive means that you have to be an expert in everything. We will today, talk today about simplification and automation and some ways to make this stuff simple, simple but not easy, as they say. But I think of wellness, even though I work in the financial space as a financial planner and educator, I really think that our money, the job of our money is to support our life, not the opposite way. So not the other way around of kind of fitting our life into our money. Let's fit our money into our life. It requires some intentionality, certainly. But once you set it up and you're more thoughtful about that overall pie of the physical, mental, spiritual, relational, and financial wellness, you'll definitely be in a better place tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I love thinking of money as a tool and how it can help us in all areas of life. And you're right, everyone is different. You and I, our pies look differently, and where we invest and where we want to invest more, both literally and theoretically. But how do you, in the beginning, start
Hmm.
to get this piece of the pie under control? The financial piece, as you just said, sometimes it takes time, energy, and literal money resources to invest into these things to
Hmm.
get it under control. So when I'm first starting to think about, okay, people talk about financial freedom, people talk about not
Hmm.
working until they're 80 years old. I want to be that person. I'm 35 now, maybe I'm 40 listening to this. How do I start to take control of this stuff if it's never something that I've paid attention to in the past?
Yeah, I think it's first starting with an education of understanding. I think about it as two islands. right? So our job, financial wellness, is building this bridge between two islands. One island is I call your comprehensive financial ecosystem. That's everything in your life with a number on it. So that's all your financial documents, your pay statements, employee benefits packages, your investment statements, maybe your estate planning documents and things like that. I think a lot of us think about finance like on that side. We think about the numbers, and things with numbers and things with commas and decimal points. Where we miss it though is you can't really build a bridge when there's only one island. So we have to build this bridge between that island, your comprehensive financial ecosystem, and this other island, which are you and your family's unique values and desired outcomes. So one thing you mentioned there, Paul, you asked, how do we start? Maybe how do we start building that bridge? And one thing you said is, I don't want to work until I'm 80, right? I want to retire early. Like you're actually helping quantify the qualitative things on this island of what are your desired outcomes. So before I even get into, again, how much do you earn? What's your cash flow statement? What's your income and expenses? What is your net worth statement of your assets and liabilities? Those are all on the quantitative side. So I think first, kind of like Simon Sinek, start with why. I would first, like, for example, Paul, I would lead you down this path of, when you mention, I don't want to be working when I'm in my 80s, right? Like I would like to, go 3 levels deeper on that, because I think that until you really have a why, it's very difficult to figure out the other parts, the what, when, who, where, all those other questions. So yeah, I really like to step back, and maybe the irony in this is I like to start thinking about finances completely taking away the numbers. And certainly you definitely get back to the numbers, but I think it's so important that we understand kind of who we are and who we want to become before we start plugging the numbers in. And I'll actually, Paul, I'll ask you kind of a basic question here. This is a good, maybe a starting point for you is, so Paul, if you were to think about letting a stranger, so somebody you've never met, who's never met you, doesn't know you, if they were to review your credit card statement and your banking transactions, what might they assume about what you value?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, honestly, I would. They're not going to see much. I don't spend a lot of money, so that's the podcast editing software and gym memberships are the majority of my spending. So I think that does align very well with my values. And yeah, I mean, I love that exercise. Show me your credit card statement and show me your calendar. If you could show me those two things, I think that we can see everything about. People will say, I value family, and it's like, well, okay, well, let me see what you spent money and time on in the last 3 months. And if it's all work and no play with your family and all your money is on your cars and not your kids, that we start to see discrepancies there. Hey, real quick, we'll be back to the show in just a few seconds, but right now I just have to tell you about my free weekly newsletter. If you want to join the thousands of change seekers just like you who get a curated list each week of 5 educational, informative, and inspiring pieces of content to help you on your quest for change, then click the link in the notes that says free newsletter right now. You'll get signed up for free tips that will make your change journey easier, sent straight to your inbox every Friday. All you have to do is click free newsletter in whatever app you're listening on. Okay, now back to the show. So I love that. I love the differentiation between the quantitative and the qualitative. I think it's maybe Young who said he who has a why can survive anyhow or something like that. So especially with this stuff, like the number stuff, as you, already when you're saying income statements and this and that, like already my head is like, well, like I don't want to
Yeah.
with that. So how is it that you got to this point being a financial planner, but saying, I don't even talk to people about finances in the beginning? I would imagine that's kind of a contrarian way to go about this.
Yeah, I mean, I just found that this over time, I've worked with hundreds of families from different backgrounds and different financial weight classes in a way. And I think it really comes down to, I find that money just magnifies who you already are. I know that's a very simple phrase, but what I find is that I work with people who, let's say, have $10 million investable. They only spend $40,000 a year, right? Like they certainly have enough money, right? But they've lived a life of not just frugality, but anxiety, that fear of future uncertainty that may not come to pass. And what I find is that if I just focus on the numbers, I can't really help somebody gain confidence without first gaining clarity. And what I find is that if somebody is frugal and anxious throughout their whole earning, part of the career accumulation, like it's going to be impossible for me to make them feel, confident moving into retirement. Because what I find is that that person who is anxious with, $10 in the bank is still anxious with 10 million in the bank. So I think that without identifying, those deeper intentions, and also, of course, the history. I know it sounds like I'm going into therapy here, but like really, my job is to really help people understand themselves better. I think that the number one quality characteristic in a good financial advisor, financial planner, is genuine curiosity. So again, I maybe a little selfishly, like I really like to learn more about people, maybe in a sad way, in a way, like sometimes, people sharing their fears and anxieties can give me a lot more information than the stuff that people say they want. So it's almost like ask somebody what they don't want, and you'll actually figure out what they do want.
It's very interesting as you're talking, because the way that you're explaining how you work with people in finances is exactly how I work with people on the health, wellness, mindset side of things, and exactly how I was trained to work with people. This is not by accident. As you said, someone who has $10 in their bank account and they feel anxious about money will still feel anxious about money when they have $10 million in their bank account. And that's very much the same as the person
Mm,
who thinks that they're unhappy at a higher weight and think that when they lose the weight, everything will be different and they'll will be unhappy. But if you haven't gotten
mm,
through to the root issues of what is causing that unhappiness, it usually actually isn't the weight, it's something deeper than that. So I'm not a therapist, but we end up playing therapist a lot. And as you said, the
mm,
connection piece is so huge, because that's the same thing as a personal trainer in fitness and all of this stuff. It's like I could just tell people what to do, but
mm.
that no one does that. Of course, if all we needed
Yeah.
was more information, then Google would have solved every
Mm.
issue that we have. Chat GPT can do all of that. And yet people are still stuck, frustrated, stagnant, spinning their wheels, whatever. And I love that the personal aspect that you bring to this. So I'm curious, in your business,
Mhm.
why or how did you become so passionate about helping people and
Mm.
start to give away so much for free?
Yeah, I think that there's this idea of money scripts. There's a few different money scripts. So they're kind of like the stories we tell ourselves about money that are primarily subconscious or come from our history and our families. And one of my money scripts is certainly money vigilance. Like I'm a type of person who has an emergency fund, or always want to prepare for the emergency. Is the definition of an emergency is the one thing you didn't plan for. So you're always ruminating about what's the possible thing that could happen. But I identify with this money script of money avoidance, which is this idea that maybe growing up, when I didn't grow up in a family with a lot of money, if I asked if I asked for something as a kid, it was like at the most you might get it for your birthday or Christmas, but you didn't get it the same week you asked for it. And I saw a lot of friends, they were going through, I don't know if do you remember the East Bay catalogs? So the East Bay catalogs of all the Shaq's new shoes and the Michael Jordan shoes and the jerseys and stuff. And I had a next door neighbor. Again, not nothing bad about him, but my framing of this is he grew up kind of like anytime he wanted something out of that catalog, he would just say, "Hey, mom, I want this," and it would be in the mail the next day, or they go to the mall to go get it the same day. And I think that I developed this limited belief, and I was telling myself this story that people with more money are bad, or like they don't deserve it, or there's kind of two parts of it. Was people who have money, I assume they'll do bad things with it. And I assume that if people have money, that they might have done something bad to receive that money. So I was seeing people who really didn't align with my core values, right? Of like the things that I thought were important, and seeing that they had more money. And again, I told myself this limited story that's better to have less money. Kind of, I think that's part of it. I think that's part of why I give a lot away. I think that I still have maybe this going into my own therapy. It's like maybe I feel like I'm undeserving of not just money, but like other things, right? Again, you can get deeper into like, why don't you think you deserve success or money or freedom or things like that? So, but what I find the irony in giving, maybe this little sidebar, that I really define kindness as giving to others without expecting something in return. I think a big part of this story for me is that, again, you look at anything that you're sold, for example, on social media or on on the internet, for example. Anytime you see an ad, if they provide you any value in that moment, it's really kind of with an end in mind of selling you something, of benefiting from you. And especially in the financial advisory industry, there's so much information out there, like, hey, here's a little bit of personal finance education, and if you want to learn more, set up a free consultation. It's kind of like saying, like, there's this barrier between you and an education. We're saying, hey, like, you can get an appetizer of what you can learn, But if you really want to learn this stuff, you need to hire me. And this false belief in our industry that that you can't manage money, you can't manage your own money successfully. So again, a roundabout way of saying that the industry I found is kind of lacked transparency and generosity in the past, and then also just growing up, I actually found that I felt I just naturally feel good giving to others without expecting something in return. Ironically, I ended up in a place career wise where I'm actually doing much better financially. Almost like the more I've given away, the more my businesses have grown. Maybe just because of that, just the different way of doing business.
Yeah, so good. There is, I don't think, no coincidence in the fact that the more you give away, the more money that you make. And they've studied this and shown this. There's the law of reciprocity. Humans want to give back to someone. And that's why companies try to take advantage of it, right? By saying, hey, here's something free, now buy from me. But as you said, especially younger generations who have grown up in the social media age are getting very hip to it. We spot an ad and see an ad and can sniff an ad out, or a slimy sales tactic or something like that instantly. So the only way around that for business owners listening is to just wholeheartedly give with no expectation of return. I mean, that's what I do with this podcast. And people always ask me, like, do I make money off this podcast? I definitely have made money off of this podcast because I've got clients, I've had people reach out to me, I've had business opportunities come from it. But that's never the case or the reason that I did it. I just I have so much information in my head that I want to give away from years and years of experience of doing this, and I want to be able to help people. And just like you said with your industry, the health and wellness industry is an industry that I have a lot of gripes with. So I'm like, there's so much out there that I don't like. How can I do something better? So I 100% am there with you. And I think we see that in all areas of life when you can give back, as you said, without an expectation of something coming back to you. Ironically, paradoxically, that's how you get the most return. But I want to circle back to the money scripts specifically, because I think this is a big one.
Sure.
You mentioned the one money script, which I think maybe might be the most prevalent, especially at people maybe like you were, who grew up a little bit with less money and now are trying to break into that next stratosphere. They have that script of money is evil. All those 80s movies, the Gordon Geckos and the Wall Streets and stuff like that, where the rich guy is always the bad guy. And it's like the poor person is the hero and they have to fight and get scrappy and yada, yada. So we've seen that one. I'm curious, what are some of the other money scripts or subconscious programming that you've seen maybe in clients, maybe with others, or that we might pop up in our own lives?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to actually read you again rather than reinventing the wheel. I'll go ahead and tell you some of these, just the basic four money scripts that you might hear of. Money vigilance, right? So these are people who are typically alert, watchful, and concerned about their financial health, right? These are the type of people who want to save for a rainy day, right? Anytime you see, I think money vigilance, by the way, actually really grew out of Great Depression parents and grandparents, where they told you never know when you're going to need that. So they become more alert of saying, hey, even though I have this money, I'm worried that if I spend it, I'll actually need it in the future. So they're really scared to lose. As soon as a comma or a dollar amount falls off their net worth, they freak out a little bit. There's also money avoidance, which I mentioned earlier, like an association with people who are wealthier, right? That kind of, again, like that they might have either earned that money or spent that money doing bad things. There's also money status. This is kind of the idea that your net worth equals your self-worth, kind of the opposite in a way, kind of saying those outward displays of wealth, they might identify with money status, feeling like the more I display my wealth, the better I feel about myself. And then money worship is the final one. Believing that money is a key to happiness, that money can solve all problems. It was like you mentioned, Paul, before, about without that why, you can have somebody who feels like, hey, like if I have a six pack, everything in my life will be better, right? Or if I had $1 million, I wouldn't have any problems in the world. My anxiety would go down. It was actually the opposite of what we talked about, that if money is a magnifier, if wealth is a magnifier of who you are already, right? Anxious people might become more anxious. Ironically, on the other side, generous people become more generous with more wealth. So again, money status, money worship, money vigilance, and money avoidance. You can, by the way, go on a Dr. Brad Klontz. If you go to bradklontz.com, maybe we can put that in the show notes. Great test you can take. It'll ask you a series of questions to help you identify what those scripts are, even some of those stories you're telling yourself.
Yeah, super powerful. I appreciate that a lot. I'm so, keen on stories, the stories that we tell. The stories that we tell are the thing that write the rest of the story. So as you said, it's no coincidence that people who grew up with parents or grandparents who were survived the Great Depression now think about money in such a way, and in the same opposite, that someone who grew up with very rich parents and never had to think about
Mm.
money will have a different money script that's running in the background. So once we start to see that, and we can see okay, like I have this internal money script, but I want to make tangible, actionable changes. If I'm someone who's never thought about finances, I'm the spend on a credit card, it just goes, and I just, I hope at the end of the month that I have more money left than debt, and that's it. Where do you start someone to start to build those foundational skills? Like what are the bedrock skills of financial literacy?
Yeah, I think that. So let's not talk about investments. So a lot of people think about, like the future upside potential, and they look at the stock market a lot. And as you know, if let's say a stock goes up 50%, but you only have $1 in it, right? Like how much does that change your life? So I think we have to step back and think about. A good friend of mine, Jen Steliga, says cash flow is the wellspring of a financial plan. And thankfully, we can simplify this and say the only real thing that matters to start is your inflows and your outflows. Where is your money coming from? Right? How are you earning your money or gaining access to money? And then where's your money going? Right? How are you spending, right? Giving, saving, and investing. So I actually tell people to start, as I mentioned before, there are two fantastic places to start. Literally looking at these things side by side. So your pay statement, I know none of us actually get like a physical pay statement, right? We had to like tear off. They called it a pay stub because you actually like tear off the check off of the rest of it. But going digitally and just looking at your last pay statement, I don't think that most people have a good understanding of not just what they earn in terms of base salary, but understanding like the true form of compensation. So understanding like what is your employer? Again, I'm assuming for a minute that we're W-2 and employees here, but understanding like what is your true form of compensation. We often think about, hey, I get a base salary. Let's say I get a base salary of $50,000, right? I might get a bonus of $5,000, right? But we forget about things like employer benefits. Maybe our employer is actually paying $10,000 a year toward our health insurance. They might be covering 50,000 or more of life insurance coverage for us. One that we don't think about, again, in terms of time is money or money is time, is paid time off. Again, one way to identify somebody's values is somebody who says, "Oh, I wish, like, oh, I never get time off," or they're really stressed, and you see that they haven't taken a day of PTO in the last 5 years. That they're just building it up, and maybe they value the dollar amount. Maybe if they leave that employer, that's going to end up being a nice payout. But again, like we talked about earlier, if you neglect your physical and mental health, like how likely are you to be productive at work and really to build a successful career? So I think looking at your income from your pay statement's the best place to start. And then your outflows, a lot of people think about these expenses. I like to start with there's kind of an irony here that a lot of people use apps. They might use what used to be people used to use Mint. Now they use maybe YNAB, You Need a Budget, or Monarch Money, or some of these apps here. But I actually find that the first time, don't use an app. Make it as manual as possible the first time, which doesn't sound simple. You're like, well, why don't we just simplify, use an app? Those are easy to get started. I actually find that, kind of maybe eat that frog, like do the hard thing first. I think it's best to, again, get your pay statement and then export all of your credit card and bank transactions as a CSV file, pull that into like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. And what I would like for you to do is actually ironically, hide the dollar column and then go through your transactions and identify how does this transaction align with my physical, mental, spiritual, or relational health. And what I find is by having people identify their values in their transactions first, then it feels a lot more shameful and judgmental to look at the dollar amounts that we align with those transactions. So a really powerful, again, I might be able to share a video, like a real client video that they gave me permission to share. We actually do this exercise together, right? We're spouses going through their transactions, each of them identifying, from a value of 0 to 10, each of these transactions and how does this align with what I value. And then when we got to the numbers, rather than me telling them, hey, it looks like you need to stop eating out so much at this Mexican restaurant that you go to every week, Now I understand that that Mexican restaurant provides the most value to their family on a weekly basis because it's the only restaurant where their child with special needs feels heard and understood and respected. Right. So I love for you, if you're listening, like to identify the values that show up in your transactions. And when you see a misalignment between what you value and how much you're spending on something, that's the place to start. So if you're the type of person who's already spending more than spending more than they earn, rather than being judgmental and feeling like you have to cut expenses on everything in your budget, really start with what things do I value the least that I'm spending money on. And then lastly here, before my mouth gets so dry, I ask people too that let's say that they do value eating out and they spend a lot of money on that. I'll ask them, what are the things related to eating out that provide value to you? And then they might say, I like that we can put our phones away and just have a meal together as a family, and a great environment. I would say, oh, like what about the environment is great to you? And they might go three levels deeper. And what's cool is that through this conversation, we can identify how can you perceive those same valuable things without eating at that restaurant. So another example was somebody who said they like going on these trips, really expensive trips, staying in the nicest hotels on the beach. They go out and I said, hey, what is it that you value about these vacations on the beach? They're like, oh, we like to sit on the sand and everybody gets their favorite book and we just sit on the beach for a couple hours and just read. It's just a very, it's so valuable and peaceful. And what I noticed is this same family lived only 30 minutes from water, right? It's like, wait a minute, we could actually just drive 30 minutes to a really nice area with water and sit on the shore, read our books. And by the way, save $30,000 a year. But yeah, I think not until you identify your values can you have a healthy conversation about especially cutting your expenses.
So good. I mean, one, that activity of literally downloading that file, and I love blocking out the money, the money column, and actually looking at, how does this highlight my values. It's so much overlap between, again, exactly what you're doing and exactly what I've been trained to do as a coach, because one, knowing your values, right? I talked about this all the time as a superpower, knowing knowledge of self. You don't know how to make decisions if you don't know yourself. But specifically, pointing, this is just me giving you a little credit here. It points to how skillful you are at this. Exactly like you just said, like I could have looked at that thing and told them, hey, don't eat out so much. But that's taking too much control and trying to dictate the right answer, where by stepping back and letting them fill in the blanks, you actually found out that, oh, actually that is a good choice. That is a good use of your money, because it is exactly as you said, that you have a child and this is a great place to go to, and all these things. And if we stop at just like, oh, spending money bad, saving money good, we don't actually save. It's the same thing in fitness, right? If I'm the personal trainer who's just yelling at people or something like that, like just like the drill sergeant or something, as you said, you need to go 3 layers deeper all the time. And I love that you will have a real come to whatever moment when you look at that file, right? When you're like, okay, like I value X, Y, and Z, but all my money is going to A, B, and C. You have to justify that somehow, and you have to either figure it out and say like, okay, like things, maybe I don't value these things as much as I thought I did, or maybe I have to change the way I'm spending. That would be the ideal outcome, theoretically. And as you're saying that, you brought up some great examples of the families who, different ways that you've seen that play out in real time. But I'm curious, how do you, maybe in your own personal life with your family or with clients you've worked with in the past, start to even find those values? Because so many of us don't know what we are looking for. We just know, like, well, I don't want to be broke. And that's as far as I've thought about this.
Yeah, I think there's this. You might have heard of. Have you heard of Kinder's 3 questions?
Maybe not, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not like the absolute expert in here, but I will say, I think it's nice to, anytime we struggle with these questions, whether it's financial or just our values, it's actually nice to step back and kind of go through some kind of, I think they're called, it's great to ask somebody, would you like to do an experiment? Everybody likes experiments, right? Every kid likes to do an experiment. So you never grow out of that. But I'll go ahead and describe these 3 questions. These are George Kinder. He's an expert in financial planning from the human side of money, the qualitative side. So question 1, I'll just go quick on these. He says, I want you to imagine that you are financially secure, that you have enough money to take care of your needs now and in the future. As you notice, this question is typically asked to people who don't have enough money to be secure, right? But this says, hey, if you were financially secure, right? The question is, how would you live your life differently? What would you do with the money? Would you change anything? So don't really like kind of dreaming top down rather than bottom up. I think a lot of times when people trying to dream about what their life would look like, they're already limiting them. They're limiting their vision and their dreams because they're taking on their present moment. Plus, of course, plus the or really minus the limited beliefs that they have about their ability to change. So first understanding, hey, if you were financially secure, what might change in your life? That's question one. Question two gets a little deeper. It says, this time you visit your doctor who tells you that you have 5 to 10 years to live. The good part is that you'll never feel sick. But the bad news is that you'll have no notice of the moment of your death. What will you do in the time you have remaining to live? So again, it takes on the question one of assume that you are financially secure, that anything you would want to spend money on, you could afford, but you have a limited time, which by the way, memento mori, right? Remember your death. We all have that limited time and don't know the date. So if you knew you were going to die in the next 5 to 10 years, how might you change your life if you did have financial security? Question three is the best. I think it's the best one because it kind of takes away, it kind of goes against the normal grain of these questions. It says, this time the doctor shocks you with the news that you only have 1 day left to live, right? And usually the question is, what would you do with your last day remaining? But most people come up with the same answer. I'd spend more time with the people I love, right? I'd spend time with my friends and family and the people I love and not really think about money. But it says, notice what feelings arise as you confront your real mortality and ask yourself, what dreams will have been left unfulfilled? What do I wish I had finished or had been? What do I wish I had done? Did I miss anything? I think when you get to that third question, you have to go to that third level of the dream state, dreaming without those limited beliefs to really understand what you value. And kind of ironically, if I ask myself this question of what did you miss? Again, by the way, I'm not financially secure, but I can confidently say that I don't feel like I missed anything. If I left the earth today, I wouldn't feel like something was undone. Which again, I know that I won't feel that way every day, but I think that maybe coming from a place of kind of daily gratitude and practicing these questions like regularly, I've come to a place of feeling like, hey, like I think I'm good, and I'm going to continue moving toward the things I said I valued and wanted to change in questions 1 and 2.
Yeah, those questions are very powerful. A extremely eye-opening process to walk anyone through about money or not. Again, that's why I love there's so much overlap here just with everything. And anyone who listens to the show enough knows that I say all the time, everything is the same. That's why I love talking to a financial planner because it's the same thing I talk to people of fitness about. It's the same thing that life coaches talk about. It's the same thing that entrepreneurs or business coaches or CEOs talk about. It's the same rules apply. This is just life stuff. And to your point, Cody, about if this was you doing this experiment, you would say like, no, I feel pretty good. One of my favorite books is The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And they talk about, this is a hospice nurse who wrote her memoir about her time with people in their last stages of life and what she found that people's biggest regrets, and almost never was money the regret. It was always it was always experiences, and more often than not, there's another book called Regret by Dan Pink who dives into this even more. More often than not, it was things that we didn't do. So very, very rarely in the studies do they find that people regret doing things. It's never, I regret going out for that team. It's I regret not trying. I regret asking that girl out. It's I regret not doing it. It's not I regret investing in that thing, even though if you invest in that thing and all the money goes away, you probably feel in that moment like it's the end of the world. But usually there's something bigger. It's those deeper held values that we will start to chip away at and understand, again, going 1 layer, 2 layers, 3 layers deep. So I really appreciate you sharing those questions. And I think that anyone who's listening would be served to take a few moments after this episode and actually go through that. I want to know, Cody, you're doing so much. You have 4 businesses. You're giving away a ton for free. You have a podcast. You have so much going on. What's the change that you want to see in the world?
Yeah, I want to, first I'll start maybe smaller in the world of, personal finance. What I want to see change is we talked about again, more transparency, generosity. There shouldn't be barriers between consumers and advisors, consumers and professionals. Like everything I know should be freely available to everybody else. And by the way, it is. Sometimes it needs to be packaged more nicely, maybe on a YouTube playlist or something. So certainly the generosity, transparency side. But my big mission, again, if I were to kind of the big, very big, audacious, what is it? The BHAG, right? The big, hairy, audacious goal is that I want to change the public perception of financial planning. And what I mean by that is I want people to understand, yes, like we said, that wellness is physical, mental, spiritual, relational, financial. But the other idea is that financial planning isn't just choosing which investments to buy and sell. I think that we're surrounded by personal finance media. Like you turn on anytime you hear about finance on the media, it's about like what's happening in the stock market. But as you even talked about before, if you don't understand your income and outflow, like who cares what you're investing in if you're not actually putting money into the account? So I think my passion is to change the public perception that financial planning is truly comprehensive. It covers those islands, everything in your life with a number on it, your comprehensive financial ecosystem. Also, like I mentioned, your unique values, desired outcomes. Really, you can't build a bridge between those two islands if you don't have the clarity. Like you can't build that confidence until you have the clarity of those things. So ways I've done that, by the way, if you go to the Measure Twice Money YouTube channel, I've actually shared my entire financial planning process freely as a YouTube playlist. Literally, you can, I just like say, hey, here's everything I do for clients with clients collaboratively. You can do it yourself. I also, again, I do sell some video courses that include some downloadable templates for people who want to be more efficient and not necessarily want to start their own templates from scratch. But also my financial planning meetings are actually on YouTube to watch. So we talked about that idea of how do you really help clients understand their values. You can actually watch me in a real client meeting with a real financial planning client helping her. So yeah, like ultimately I want to change the public perception of what financial planning includes quantitatively, but I also want people to understand that it's really a collaborative conversation. That my role as a financial planner, by the way, I'm not accepting clients, so none of this is a sales pitch to hire me as an advisor. I'm not accepting new client relationships, but I will say that a financial planner's job is not to tell you what to do. It's not just give me money and I tell you what to do. It's to help families, individuals and families make their own well-informed decisions. What I mean by that is, well-informed is that rather than me telling them what to do, I provide personalized education so they have that clarity and confidence to actually make their own decision. And Paul, lastly here, this idea of, you might have heard of motivational interviewing, right? So rather than telling people what to do based on my own bias and kind of what I've been taught in school, I like to ask enough questions where clients actually determine their own path moving forward. And my list of recommendations is actually their own recommendations for themselves, often even in their own words. So it's kind of ironic there is that they'll say, "Oh wow, Cody, your recommendations are so helpful. Thank you so much." But maybe it's a little bit of a righteous trick that all of the recommendations were things that they already knew they wanted to do, but they wanted to gain the clarity and confidence to actually move forward with that implementation.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. Everything that I do, all of my coaching is built on motivational interviewing, which is why, as you're talking, every time I'm like, I can see what you're doing, and that. But to me, that is the exact way to change. I like going back to, if it were as simple as just tell people what to do and they'll do it, we would live in a different world. The reality is people do what they want to do. So it's the coach, the advisor, the therapist, the whoever's job to help them find that place. I look at myself or you as, I would say, a guide on the side. Like it's still your journey. I just have to help you get there faster and more efficiently, because I might even know where you need to go, where you want to go, but it doesn't do me any service or do you any service to tell you to skip the line. You have to go through that process yourself. I want to just highlight for the listeners something that you mentioned as you were talking. You said it's not just about picking stocks and things like that, and realize that we are 30 plus minutes into an interview with Cody, a certified financial planner, all about talking finance and financial wellness today. And we have not talked about stocks or investments or anything like that for even 1 minute. It's the same as, again, when people talk to me about fitness and they think I'm going to talk about, should you be doing squats or lunges? And it's like, let's start with the basics. So much can be done with just the fundamentals. Only when you have the fundamentals so down packed that it's second nature do you even need to start wasting any of your finite mental energy on the higher level stuff. So many people screw themselves up by jumping straight into that without having a grip on the basics. Like Cody said, money in versus money out. Why are you on Robinhood when you don't know how much money you're spending every month? Like you're way off base. So I love that, Cody, and everything that you're doing to make this more accessible. You sharing all of that on YouTube. I'm going to link to all of that in the show notes. The last question that I have, maybe you've already said it because you've already given us so much actionable advice, but if you had one action step that listeners can take right now today, as soon as this episode ends, as soon as they take their headphones out, to start making whatever change they're trying to make in their life a little bit easier, whether it's financial or otherwise, what would it be?
Yeah. So going back to this idea of, looking to the past is usually regret. Usually, you looking to the future is typically anxiety, right? So, to be mindful in terms of like practicing mindfulness, I have a phrase I use that says we must understand where we are before determining where to go and how to get there. So rather than focusing on what you should implement and monitor moving forward, just start with what you have. I'll share with your listeners. There's a data gathering checklist, which is a list of all the financial documents that are relevant to a family, an individual or a family. That once you can even watch all the videos on YouTube, but it actually breaks down step by step how to review every one of those financial documents so that you actually have clarity over where you currently are. And then again, not until you have that clarity of where you stand today will you actually feel confident with which things you're buying and selling, which types of insurance you are either getting or intentionally not getting. So before you can take action, implementation, and monitoring, which is at the end of the financial planning process, you first have to do your data gathering, which is both quantitative, qualitative. And if you're married or if you have family in your house, like start having these conversations and make it, as I mentioned before, think of this as an experiment, right? Don't think of this as a chore or a job. And a lot of people think the word budget is like another 4-letter word, right? People hate the word budget. Can we call it value-based spending? Again, call it whatever you want, right? But until you understand where you are in the present, if you have a stack of bills in the mail that you haven't opened yet because you're scared about what it's going to say, again, not opening the bills doesn't make it any easier, right? So again, open the bills, put it all on the table, right? Get your pay statement, your employee benefits, your tax return, all those things, put it on the table. And by the way, if you feel overwhelmed and don't know what all these things mean, again, there's a lot of free resources like I provide, but there's also there's financial planners and coaches who specialize in providing and helping you provide that clarity without making you feel bad about what you've done in the past.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate all of that. And for anyone who, I'm going to link to your YouTube in the show notes, your website. For anyone, I know you said you're not taking clients, but for anyone just wants to learn from you and see what you have going on, where's the best place to point them?
Yeah, so the Measure Twice Money YouTube channel is where I'm providing a lot of free information. I'm on social media everywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter, which is now X, right? I'll still call it Twitter forever, Facebook, things like that. Yeah, Cody Garrett, two R's, two T's. Yeah, go just start with the YouTube channel, and you'll find all the other stuff from
Amazing.
there.
If you're really passionate about making this change stick, then I just have to remind you about my free weekly newsletter. Don't miss out on joining the thousands of change seekers just like you who get a curated list each week of 5 educational, informative, and inspiring pieces of content that will help you on your quest for change. Go to the notes of whatever app you're listening on and click the link that says free newsletter now. And you'll be signed up to get free tips sent straight to your inbox every Friday that will help make your change journey easier. All you have to do is click free newsletter right now. Go to that link, and I'll see you back here every Tuesday and Thursday for new episodes of Change Made Easy.